And that's something that's also rare because you don't usually see men write that well for a woman.
That's a whole...
There's a man that just said, huh? Have you tried to write women characters for women? I had that discussion in Dallas. It gets very complicated and sometimes dangerous. This is a guy who actually did phenomenal work writing a female character and drawing in a female audience the way they have.
And his first time. That's amazing.
We all love him.
Well, you know, and the other interesting thing is, you know, he was able to get something off the ground of this magnitude, and it went back to doing a second pilot. They were going to toss this in the scrap heap. And so it's very fortunate that this was able to come about, and he was able to stick it out and fight for it and get it back to, you know, even the few things that we have of it. So I think there would be a lot more to go with this. The frontier mentality, this exploratory human nature, this Wild West mentality, and I don't mean like the one that still goes on in Carson City, Nevada. I mean this whole idea, we're at a time period right now, we're in a time period where the space program's kind of, you know, and the shuttle's going away and so on and so on and so forth, and we're kind of in this survival mode as a culture. But if you look back at 2002, when this series was created and put out there, 2002. Oh, it's okay. Maybe you discovered it in 2007, and that's okay. But 2002, I remember what was going on when I was still, you know, I was still an undergrad in Boston, and I was starting to move into, you know, going on and moving on in 2002. But we had hit some really bad economic times. People were talking about, you know, we come out of 9/11, we've got all this strife. You know, we're in kind of a survival, warring kind of mode. So a lot of the themes in this make sense, but why an exploratory idea? Why put that in at a time when we're kind of gearing down from that, even in 2002, and focusing on ourselves on a local level and all the trouble that's going on internally, rather than let's go out and explore and find ways to do new things and be exciting again? So why put in a theme like that?
Because Joss Whedon is awesome.
Okay, that too. And bring a culture together. Because you know what? It's that same thing that people are drawn to with many other franchises. This didn't really have a chance to be a franchise.
It's kind of like in the middle of Vietnam and the Cold War when Gene Roddenberry came up with the hopeful outlook of the future.
Yeah,
we didn't just blow ourselves up with the bomb.
You know, he took away my moment, man. He took away my shiny moment. Okay. I had to use the word at least once. It's annoying to hear that word, but I had to use it at least once. Anyhow, I think it's that whole idea that, wow, we see these tough times starting to fracture people. We're coming out of 9/11. The economy's starting to go bad. What do we do? And people are starting to really get nasty with each other. How do we infuse some positiveness in this pot? Give them that whole thing that they started out with in the first place that made them think and do. And that's what you see reflected here. This whole Wild West, let's go out, let's take on everything, screw the government, we're going to survive as people, and I'm going to throw a social movement party in my Serenity ship. And I think that's what people still latch onto as we continue in similar times. And it's always going to be a message like that that people are very drawn to, and characters like this that people are going to be drawn to for that reason. That might be why all of you are sitting here today, and why you really like the show. Some other things I threw out here as a cultural mirror. The companions. Now this is really interesting to me. The only other time I've seen companions on this level are in parts of Nevada. And they have bunny ranch shows, so it's a little different. They're not, you know, but this is a whole other cultural entity unto itself, and it's very tastefully done. Why?
Well, it's based upon the geisha.
Yeah. And how is that perceived culturally?
Well, if you look at that. Oh, sorry.
You want to jump on the mic? Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
They just love you.
You're all weak. If you look at the cultural relevance of the female entity, the anima,
women were always held in the highest esteem for their bodies when they had to offer men. In the ancient times, they were in the temples, and men would come to visit them. Powerful men would come, who had wives and children elsewhere, would come to these women for miles to be with them. So the entire companion perspective is not really new. It's just taken, and they used it very well in the series.
They did, and I think it's a nice compliment to the series and what the series is about.
Absolutely.
And the meanings they're trying to convey. So it was ideal. And in a very short time, you see a very well created, crafted culture that you can understand. And it's because of that analogy, I think. The ship itself, I would love to have seen this ship explored more, and hopefully at some point it would be, as a cultural entity. And there was so much more that could be done with that ship as its own entity, and how that entity interacts and shapes the crew. Because it was, you know, it has a specific meaning, it has a specific name that ties into the theme, and so on and so on and so forth. There's a lot of untapped material, I think, still there under that heading. It's a distinct cultural center, and a lot more could develop with those characters. I think what they've done with it thus far is excellent in terms of how that culture is unfolded, and who's who, and how things are run. Because you already see in just a short amount of time, a few episodes, this co-evolution between the crew, the characters, who they are, and the way this ship functions for them, and the meaning the ship has for them. So I think it's a really neat theme that does need further exploration, but you do see this, and it's just really neat to you understand them through their relationship with this ship. Symbiotic relationship. And I think what's really neat is the tie-in with the theme song.
That theme song is bad.
No! That theme song epitomizes the whole meaning of the show! Sung by Captain Mal.
She means bad like 70s bad.
Just listen. Oh, maybe that's what she meant, but you gotta hear the words. And you understand the name of the ship, and gosh. And the blend with the Chinese culture, all this stuff comes together to give you the real philosophy of this show. God, don't take the words away from the song. Don't kill the song. You did that with Enterprise, and I've never been the same since. No, this is better than that. All right, so the symbolism of that theme. The operative and the themes of evil, we could go on for days. They didn't go on for days. We could, and we would like to suggest that they do. You know, the significance of Miranda. What is Miranda? I'd like to, have a little dialogue, so I'm going to zip it here. So, Miranda, what's going on with Miranda? I chose that for a reason.
Experiment.
Yeah, go ahead and jump up there.
Hi. If you saw the movie, then you would know that it was the origin of the Reavers, where they introduced a Pax into the air supply to make the Alliance introduced a Pax into the air supply to make the population less aggressive. And for the most part it did, but it not only did it make them less aggressive, but it also made them very lazy and lethargic.
There are so many of our own themes in our history that just reek from Miranda and the Reavers and what's going on here.
Yeah, and for the most part, most of the population became lethargic, and that's where you have all the dead bodies laying around, because they just laid down and started sleeping. They didn't even care about anything anymore, but I believe it was 10% of the population became extremely overly aggressive.
Yeah, and there's also this issue that we still have with people thinking about conspiracy theories with our government and so on and so forth. So we got a couple of things happening with that we could read in there, the Reavers. And then I think there's a lot of themes, underlying race and gender and spirituality we kind of hit on a little bit there. In terms of the individual driving forces and cultural change, themes of individuality and the rights of individuals, this whole alliance versus serenity. He's kind of like this renegade who's out there making a path that's never been made before. So he's still fighting the war. He's just found a new and exciting and new creative way to do that, while making friends and influencing people along the way. And he's been teaching his crew not only how he does things, and if you want to join me, I'll give you this job, and you can be part of my crew, but he's teaching them the whys of what he's doing. So he's paving something that has to be paved, and he's taking on this role in the universe to represent basically all the unrepresented people. So the war is still continuing for him in this way, and what he's doing is he's just laying low enough under the radar, doing things his own individual way, based on his own individual diversity, and stirring things a little at a time. And you can see the positiveness come out of this. And if you're going to have massive cultural change in any society, you need to have, we have the collective, we have all the things we have in common throughout our history, the things we share. We can identify American culture right here and now and tell you 150 reasons why we have common ground here. But if I went around the room individually and looked at every single person, every one of us is going to have something a little bit different, a little bit of a different tweak to us. And you're going to find that that individuality is very necessary, because without variability, which is what it really comes down to, you don't continue to adapt to change around you, and you don't continue to evolve. You just go extinct. Well, it's a biological concept. You don't have diversity in the population. You have sexual reproduction to create variability. That little bit of variability allows for certain adaptations to take place, and so a species can survive, right? So it's no different when you look at culture. There's something in culture called memes. Memes are behaviors. I see a lot of heads nodding so people know the word. And those behaviors are passed on or transmitted through a culture. We deem what behaviors are acceptable and what are not acceptable. Even within this room, even within fandom, we have defined memes. And we tell people how they can behave and how they can't behave. When you get someone who goes against the grain, that can be good or bad. Sometimes the government just tells him, it's very bad and we want to eradicate you. But guess what? I'm going to spread this, and I'm going to get people on board, and eventually maybe we can make things right in the universe again. So sometimes that little bit of variability is going to allow for massive social change and a new evolution to occur.
Are you trying to think that Mal's on this giant grand quest consciously?
I like to think, partly yes. I really think his drive is to get people to think about what's really happening, but he's not, so he's fighting the war consciously still, but in a different way.
There was that deleted scene from Out of Gas when he went back to his bunk, and he pulled out the manual on how to change the Alliance, and he was looking through all of his... No, I'm kidding. I think it's... I don't know how much of this is conscious versus just the way he is, and it just happens.
It just happens.
He's not sitting here with a grand plan.
No, but he does.
I'm going to find my minions and teach them nicely.
No, but when he gets that ship and names it, he has a conscious thought about what he wants to do and what he wants to still fight for.
The turning point for his life was Serenity Valley.
Yeah. So he still does go into this with a conscious thought, I think.
Being a Buddhist monk and spreading serenity.
But that's the unconscious part of it. He's got this, I'm going to do this because they're not going to tell me what to do, how to do it, so I'm going to do this. So there's a conscious step forward, and then everything else kind of unfolds, and a lot of it becomes unconscious. He just becomes this other entity, and he's doing now.
I think a lot of it for Mal is not that he's consciously thinking about it, but that's just who he is as a person. Right. That's why he volunteered for the war to begin with, because he has this responsibility within himself to, I guess, to sort of put forth the fact that we're all worth it, we're all worthy of being able to be a part of this. It's not that he's consciously choosing it, it's just who he is as a man.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just inevitable. That's just what's going to
okay. I think so. Thank you.
Just a quick question. You've been talking a lot about how Mal has been influencing everyone else on the Firefly. Would you also kind of look at how everyone else is influencing him? Inara, for example, seems to be a very important part of the show in terms of bringing out emotions and acknowledging the emotional content that the characters individually are.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where I want to go back to showing that co-evolution between the ship, the characters, and looking at the deeper cultural structure on that ship. And I think that that's something, if the show continued, they did an excellent job with what they developed. There's a lot for us there to understand. I think if the show continued, that would take off and sail.
Ever played Dungeons and Dragons?
No.
This is a question for the audience then. For those of you that have played Dungeons and Dragons, would you classify Malcolm Reynolds as chaotic good, or neutral good, or lawful good?
Chaotic.
I understood that. Thank you, everybody. And we're over at F15 if you guys want to come over.